Welcome, and thank you for being part of Worksafe's webinar, Setting the Trail Ablaze, Insights for Psychological Safety. Hello, my name is Rob Kelly. I'm the Director of Specialist Services at Worksafe, and I'll be your host for this webinar. While our 2021 programs sessions for Health and Safety Month are virtual this year, our aim remains the same, and that's to keep you up to date. And this year's theme is you learn something new every day. So this particular session, we've structured in such a way as to have a conversation with myself and our three speakers who will outline the ways that WorkWell, which is a world-first program, is driving impact and influencing WorkSafe programs and our partners to prevent mental injury. So it's important now to introduce our speakers. And first up, and the leader of the WorkWell program, we have Jennifer Fry. Good morning, Jen.
Hi, Rob.
And next we have Nicholas Crooks. And Nicholas is the Senior Monitoring and Evaluation Officer at WorkWell. Good morning, Nicholas.
Morning, Rob.
And finally, we have Andrea Kirk-Brown, who is Associate Professor at Monash, but is also the co-lead of WorkWell's Expert Reference Group. Now, that's an important reference group that keeps basically WorkWell monitoring and evaluation forward to produce the best. So a bit of background first off. Workplace mental health isn't just about supporting people to cope with workplace stress or workers in distress. The new normal for workplace mental health is for workplace cultures to be psychologically safe. And what that means is the work-related factors that can impact mental health are identified and, most importantly, are either controlled or well managed. Now, WorkWell is trialing best practice interventions to prevent mental injuries. And the evaluation so far has discovered, quite excitingly, but has discovered an innovative model for predicting the psychological safety of workplaces. Now, how does that sit within the OH&S framework? Well, we know that employers must provide and maintain work environments that are safe and without risk to health. And psychological health is part of that. It's up to our business leaders, decision makers, and employers to create safe, supportive, and inclusive workplaces and develop good systems of work to support mental health in the workplace. So I'm going to kick off with Jennifer first. And Jen, I mentioned WorkWell. I said it's a world first, and there's a lot of work happening in that space about prevention of mental health. Can you tell us a bit more about it? And how is it going about creating mentally healthier workplaces?
Oh, look, thanks, Rob. Yes, look, WorkWell's been operating since 2017, and it's a really big program of work for WorkSafe. So it's a $50 million 5-year program, which we're running in partnership with Department of Health. And our work is very much around how do we influence Victorian workplaces to be mentally healthy? And how do we help them develop those positive cultures that are going to promote good mental health and prevent mental injury? And the way that we do it, that WorkWell, this is a multi-pronged program of work. And you can see from this graphic that there's 3 main streams of work, and we'll talk about that as we discuss WorkWell today. But we've got the toolkit, which is our online resource portal. We've got 2 big programs of funded programs of work. We've got the Mental Health Improvement Fund and the Learning Networks. And all of those really are applying the integrated model. And what we mean by that is that to have a mentally healthy workplace, workplaces need to prevent mental injury, need to promote good mental health, and need to be able to address when things don't go well. So address mental injuries when they occur. So, and today is really exciting because, you know, we've got some evaluation results, and Nick and Andrea are going to talk about what we've learned and what practical, tangible sorts of things we can let workplaces know. The other thing about WorkWell is that it's not WorkSafe doing it by ourselves. It's this big network of partners, and through the Mental Health Improvement Fund and the Learning Networks, we've partnered up with 520 odd organisations, and they can be employer associations or unions, academics, consultants, and all of this partnership model means that we've got all of these amazingly talented people and organisations out there collaboratively problem solving this really big issue of poor mental health within workplaces. And this is a quite different approach for Worksafe or any regulator actually to take. So it's quite world leading in the model that Worksafe's developed, and to really assist workplaces to look at mental health in a different way.
Well, congratulations. We introduced it by saying blazing the trail. I think what you've just explained there, and what really stood out for me is 520 partners. So it really is a multi-pronged approach that you're, as you said, a multi-pronged approach in dealing with it. Nicholas, I'm going to draw you in here because I want to get into a little bit more specific now. And for employers, what do we understand are the benefits for employers at preventing work-related stress?
Thanks, Rob. Well, I guess the big one is moral imperative. We know from our emerging insights that quality of working life is a key factor encompassing stress at work. And we're seeing a strong association between quality of working life and the rate of absenteeism and presenteeism in the workplace. And absenteeism is probably a term that people are probably pretty familiar with, but presenteeism is where workers are present at work, but their productivity is impacted or diminishes due to things like mental ill health. And what we're seeing is that if we can improve the quality of working life, we see reduced rates of absenteeism and presenteeism associated with those mental health concerns. And it's well understood that there's a really strong financial impact associated with both absenteeism and presenteeism. And this was highlighted in a Productivity Commission report, noting that the cost of absenteeism and presenteeism were associated with mental health was approximately $17 billion a year to the Australian economy. So there's quite a big incentive there.
Thanks for that. And drilling down a little bit more as well is how does WorkWell define what a mentally healthy workplace is?
Well, what we use a framework of 11 work-related factors that impact mental health at work. These can become hazards in the workplace if they're not managed. They include things like job demands, job control, support, and organisational change management. And I've got a little video that summarises this really well, so we might play that.
Work-related factors are anything in the management or design of work that can positively or negatively impact an employee's mental health. When these factors are not controlled or managed, they can lead to stress, which may result in a physical injury, mental injury, or even both at the same time. From workplace relationships to the impacts of remote working, understanding work-related factors gives you the power to create a positive, supportive and inclusive workplace and to develop good systems of work for supporting mental health. Take the first steps today.
So as you can see, these are the root causes of work-related stress. And if they're not controlled or managed, this can increase stress, leading to both physical and mental injuries. A mentally healthy workplace has measures in place to prevent harm, and it identifies the risks to mental health and manages them so harm doesn't occur from the early stages all the way through to supporting recovery. And at the same time, protective factors and encouraged and promoted. A mentally healthy workplace is a workplace that has these 11 work-related factors under control.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think one of the things I heard you say there is that my takeout is that when you address those particular risk factors, you're actually creating an environment for condition for worker well-being. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And Andrea, I'm going to draw to you now. You've developed this fantastic new model at predicting the psychological safety of the workplace. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yep, sure, Rob. Well, the predictive model that we're working on comes from WorkWell's Workplace Wellbeing Insights Survey, and that's a survey that consists of an employer and a worker version. Some people watching today might have already completed this. It asks questions about a range of mental health and wellbeing issues. But what we've done is we've included several well-validated scales that have been used in research for some time now. I've got a graphic I'd like to show here. So these scales measure leading indicators of occupational health and safety in general, and occupational health and safety concerning psychosocial wellbeing in particular. as well as levels of psychological safety of the workplace and quality of work life for employees. So in using these scales, what we can do is measure the impact of leading occupational health and safety practices on workers' experiences of feeling psychologically safe in the workplace, and in turn, how that then improves their quality of working life.
Tell us about the novel insights that the predictive model has actually brought. What have you found?
Well, many things can impact on psychological safety in the workplace, which we can think about like a psychological safety net, where employees feel confident that they can speak up about sensitive issues like perhaps bullying or harassment, for example, without fear of being ignored or being ridiculed. And what we found is that when workplaces have got proactive management of occupational health and safety, like good reporting systems, good risk management systems in place, and occupational health and safety involves everyone in the workplace. And in addition to that, they've got proactive practices to protect psychological health and safety, including things like a culture where leaders are really committed to the prevention of work-related stress. Workers can see that their leaders are committed and care about their psychological well-being as much as productivity. And workers from all levels are involved in decisions regarding their mental health and safety. If you've got those things in place, this results in improved psychological safety. People feel valued, included, trusted, and in turn that results in improved quality of working life. So people experience less stress, higher levels of well-being, work-life balance, increased productivity. So with the model we can predict a fair amount of the variability in workplaces' psychological safety scores. And what's exciting about that is that being able to understand what leads to higher levels of psychological safety means we can address the root causes and contribute to reducing mental health injuries, having higher productivity, and reducing costs for business.
Thanks, Andrea. And it's interesting you talk about some of the factors you spoke through there are pretty much the factors we push from Worksafe's point of view about providing safe workplaces and the conditions to provide, safe environments for workers. In some ways, it's on a cultural curve, culture maturity curve, which is going to lead me into a question I have for you now, Nicholas. You've been working on the cultural maturity model, I believe. Can you tell us more about that and how WorkWell is using it?
Sure thing, Rob. So WorkWell uses a cultural maturity model as a framework to understand the mindset of employers. And it gives us a sense of the type of leadership and the culture and the learning environment that's necessary within an organisation in order to be mentally healthy. So I've got a graphic I'd like to show that helps to explain this and shows our cultural maturity model. So what this does is this highlights that there's a tipping point for psychological safety, which occurs when we reach a point where policies and practices within an organisation are systemic. Now, we understand that there's some organisations that are still in these lower levels, in the reactive levels, and we hope that we can move those organisations up the levels towards systemic and then hopefully on to those more proactive and generative levels. And the cultural maturity of an organisation, we're also finding maps quite closely to the scores we're seeing from the predictive model around psychological safety.
Now, I get it. I understand it's early days, yes? So what are you seeing so far?
Well, what we're seeing, Rob, is that while we need more data, there is more testing to be done. We're seeing an increase in the proportion of employers that are reporting that they're very confident in addressing and identifying mental health risk factors in their organisations. And this is also coupled with a decrease in those that are reporting that they're not very confident. So what we're seeing a shift in employers across the entire spectrum in terms of their confidence and capacity to both identify and address mental health risk factors in their workplaces. And we're already seeing that there's greater confidence and capacity within workplaces. And where we see this, we're also seeing higher levels of psychological safety. And we also see a correlation with psychological safety and workers' perceptions of how mentally healthy their workplace is as well. So some really great early findings.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And Jen, I'm going to draw you back in now. We spoke a bit earlier on about having a multi-pronged approach and the great work that you're doing. In addition to the great models we've just spoke about there, the behaviour models, what else is WorkWell doing to support the mental health of Victorian employers and employees?
Oh, look, thanks, Rob. Look, I guess we're getting the evaluation data from the program, the WorkWell programs that are being rolled out. So the data is coming from workplaces who have registered to use the WorkWell toolkit and have completed the survey, and workplaces that are part of the Mental Health Improvement Fund and the Learning Network projects. So I'll just explain a bit more about what those three sort of major streams are. So the toolkit is a whole heap of different actions on the web. So it's WorkWell tool. It's workwell.vic.gov.au/toolkit, and everybody can go to that. So all Victorian workplaces can go to that, and what you can then do is register your organisation, nominate what size organisation you are, you small, medium, large, and what industry you're from. And what you'll get then is these actions that really talk to those 11 work-related factors, and also talk to the promoting good mental health in your workplace, preventing mental injury, and addressing poor mental health. So the actions are set up in step by step so that they're written in hopefully a fairly sort of friendly way, just to support people to get started, because we know that this area can be quite complicated and quite overwhelming. So that's the toolkit. Mental Health Improvement Funds is a large funding program of work, and we've funded 25 different projects across Victoria, and they are working in almost every industry sector, so from health to transport to manufacturing to education. And these projects are really trying to drill down into those work-related factors. How do they actually impact in a workplace, and what can you do? So they're building the evidence. And then the learning networks, which is the third stream, they bring workplaces and subject matter experts together to really share information, trial new things, develop sorts of resources, and it's a real connection and sharing and knowledge translation. So all of these programs of work, they all are working together to build this amazing evidence that we're seeing, because it's really changing the conversation about what workplace mental health is. So if anyone wants more information, the WorkWell website, you can have a look at all of the projects, the learning networks, and the toolkit.
Thanks for that, Jen. It's interesting because the next webinar we have is about leaders who work well, which I believe is examples from the emergency services area, the aged care sector, and universities talking about what they've trialled and what works and what doesn't work for them in pushing again for the prevention of mental injury. So I think that's a good session if you have time after this one. That's it for the formal part of this. What we're going to do now is go towards the questions. So thank you each for your insights so far. Now the hard part comes when we start to get the questions from the group. So you'll see me lean over here. This is where I'm going to be finding the questions and looking at it. We're getting a lot of interest in it. So the first one, is there a plan for compliance code for first aid to be reviewed to include psychological health first aid? I'm going to put that to you, Jen, in case you know that one.
Look, I actually don't. I think it's I think mental health first aid is a strategy that lots of workplaces use to assist people to identify and support people if they are distressed. But actually having it as part of the first aid compliance code, I'm not aware of that. So I don't know if anybody else in the chat might be able to help that person out. But I
think it's a fair point that Worksafe will take note of that question.
I think so.
Thank you. Next one up is can we kindly have access to reference material, etc., on this predictive psych safety tool? Jen.
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to hand to Nick, but we've recently published this information on the WorkWell website. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, so we've put up our emerging insights report, and we've also got our technical report related to the predictive model. So we've got those up on the WorkWell Wellbeing Insights page. So we do have an insights page where we can bring together all of the things that we're finding from the WorkWell project. And so, yeah, it can be accessed by there, and we'll be able to get a link out to people to that site. So that's probably the best place to find the resources around all the emerging outcomes that are coming out of the WorkWell evaluation.
Thank you. Nicholas, this one's actually to you because it's got your name on it. So,
Okay.
Nicholas, do you have any suggestions on the kind of changes and actions workplaces may undertake to improve the psychological safety of their workplace?
Yeah, so we know from the predictive model that things like our policies and practices around OHS are really key lead indicators for improving psychological safety in the workplace. And they're things that, OHS and those policies and practices are things that we can definitely lend from what we know about physical risk to do things in the workplace. But I think what's really key for me is addressing these things around the culture within a workplace. So making sure that we've got this supportive, open culture where managers are putting workplace mental health ahead of productivity, but also where you've got action happening at all different levels. So I think really addressing the culture around mental health in the workplace is a really key area that we can put some resources.
Thank you. This one's from Julie McLaughlin. And will there be a compliance code for psychological health? And should some details be added into OHS regulations? Who'd like to take that?
I'm happy to take that, Rob. So yes, the short answer is yes. So Worksafe is in the process of consulting at the moment in development of psychosocial regulations, and the minister announced that I think back in April that was actually going to happen. So we're looking to public consultation early next year, with the new regulations to be released later next year. So the short answer is yes.
Thanks for that, Jen. Next question up is, are the 11 categories for work-related stress listed in order of most common to least? If not, which are the highest risk? Jen, I'm going to probably lead in with you.
Yeah, look, absolutely. That depends on your organisation, and that's something that you will work out with your workers as to what the major issues are in your organisation. And generally it's not one, they're interrelated. So generally, and they also are movable feasts depending on what's happening in your organisation at a particular time. So, and usually you manage them together. So one of the risk factors for your organisation might be that people don't have great autonomy over their work or good job control. But that could also fit in to that the people are not overly clear on what their responsibilities or their roles are, which we call role clarity. So job control might be an issue, role clarity might be an issue, workload might be an issue, and it might be too high. But of course, peaks and troughs, so it won't always be too high. So the work-related factors certainly feed into each other, and it's usually not just one. But what we also do say to organisations is don't bite off too much. So work out what are the highest issues, the highest priorities for you as a workplace, and try and work through them as systematically as you can, so that you don't get overwhelmed. And that's where the WorkWell toolkit is fantastic. So it enables you to be able to speak to your employees, work out what the major issues or the major work-related factors that are impacting mental health, go to the toolkit and use those actions to get some tangible, what do we do?
Going back to the original question, actually, it reminded me that it's performance-based, I think is what you're saying. It's not a set and forget. It's not a prescriptive tool. Or it's not a prescriptive list. So pretty much like our OHS legislation, it will depend on the circumstance, and each employer and each workplace needs to look at what factors they have at theirs and what's impacting. Is that fair to say? Absolutely.
And it's not it's not something that you can say every quarter I'm going to address workplace mental health and just do a quick audit. That's not how it works. This is actually about culture at work. And it's actually about continually improving, continually assessing, and because culture does change. So it isn't something that, this is not a tick and flick exercise. This is actually really looking at how your workplace operates, how your work is designed. What we're trying to do, though, is to make that more tangible. And that's where, talking about the 11 work-related factors gives you a bit of a framework. That's where the toolkit gives you some ideas of what to do. But it's not a tick and flick exercise at all. It is an ongoing cultural management in your organisation.
You made a comment there about tangible. I think it's an important part, because what you would call, say, the traditional OH&S is about the physical risk. Guarding is probably the best example of that. It's a tangible thing. You can see the machine, you can see the moving parts, you need a guard. Is that what you mean by tangible, to talk where a mental health injury in itself, you can't see it, you can't necessarily touch it. So it's about saying these are the things that will make it more tangible to understand. Absolutely.
And I think that's where the concept of the work-related factors really come in, because they enable you to drill, and you were using that word drill down, Rob, drill down into what are the causes of people being mentally unwell at work? What are the causes of people actually having a mental injury? Or what are the causes of people just not being happy at work? And so it's drilling down into the root causes, which we've called the work-related factors. And that then gives you a real structure of saying, well, we can do something about this. This isn't just this fluffy thing that people are unhappy, but we can actually do something about it. And in fact, legislatively required to do something about it.
Thank you. This one is, and a few people missed it, so it's good to be able to reiterate it. I missed the 11 work-related factors that should be under control for a healthy workplace. Can you list them, please? Is that one for you, Nicholas?
Oh, putting me on the spot a little bit. So
where can they find it?
They can find them on the WorkWell website, but I can probably get most of them. So we'll go through. We've got job control, job demands, which can be both high and low. We've got job design or job control, sort of falls into job control. We've got organisational support, organisational change management, but organisational justice and things like that, recognition and reward. And then we have some other ones, things like organisational sort of violence and traumatic event and isolated work. And there's some of those ones where they may not apply to all industries, but they're very specific to some certain industries. So that's where they're not all present. I said that was probably a rundown of a few of them that I could come off the top of my head, but they will be very specific to certain industries. And that's where I was going to add to what Jen was saying, that's where the WorkWell Insight survey is really important, because when you do the survey, we actually give you a score for 1 to 10 for each of those work-related factors. So it gives you a really great way that you can hone in on the factors that are critical for your organisation or your industry, because some of them just won't be present in some industries and some of them will be obviously really critical.
Thanks a lot. And as you said, you can find them on the WorkWell website.
Yeah, you can find them on the WorkWell website.
Thank you. Thanks for that. This, again, from Julie McLaughlin. Is there a hierarchy of controls model for preventing of psychological health? Who'd like to take that one?
I'm happy to, if you want. There is. In Worksafe's guidance, in the occupational stress guidance, there is a hierarchy of control for occupational stress. So and it's what we're familiar with OHS management. It is, let's see if we can remove it in the first place. But again, we've got to be able to identify. We've got to be able to call what is the work-related factor, and so remove it, and then moving down the hierarchy to administrative controls at the bottom. And and I guess the sorts of things we put into that play is some of the training and the policies and practices. But yes, so the short answer is yes, and you can find it in the occupational stress guidance.
So next question kind of leads in, so you have a hierarchy of control, so there's a way forward to deal with it where people want to deal with it. The next question is, what options do safety professionals have within organisations which have inadequate appreciation for psychological risk or a lack of willingness to address psychological hazards? Jen, I'm going to throw to you on that one as well.
Yeah, look, and I think Nick's description of the cultural maturity model, it just helps us to understand and appreciate that not all workplaces are at this level of maturity. That tipping point where organisations actually understand the importance of this and have the policies and practices in place. I guess I'm going to throw it out to you consultants to use your influencing skills, but I think it is around talking about finding out from those workplaces what's going to push their buttons. Is it productivity? Is it absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover? I don't know if anyone in this who's in the audience listened to our keynote speaker. But he was basically talking about being, if you're a mentally healthy workplace, you're an organisation, an employer of choice, and how you actually spruik that. And I think we also know in this environment where lots and lots of organisations are really screaming out for staff. So when people come to be interviewed for jobs, as he said, people are interviewing you as an organisation, and there's lots of talk about how culturally healthy organisations are. So I guess from a consultant's point of view, you need to work out what's going to push people's buttons to help people move up that cultural maturity model. And I guess what we're also finding, and Nick and Andrea might want to speak to this, is that organisations that have engaged with WorkWell either through the toolkit or through the projects, we have seen shift up that cultural maturity model. So even those organisations right down the bottom who don't have much of an idea and are just hoping not to get into trouble, have actually made some shifts. Can I flick over to you, Andrea or Nick, if you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. We're doing some case studies with some organisations that have been using the toolkit. And the feedback we've had has been fantastic. People have said, look, we've been reaching out to try and find some resources. We've had problems in our organisations, and in some cases, as a person who put the comment in there said, that organisation didn't really seem to or want to be ready. But when you can start implementing smaller changes, and as they were saying, just build on that and keep going on that, and people start seeing the really positive flow-on effects, they've seen some really great turnarounds in their organisation. So it didn't start off with massive changes, just getting into things like starting to use the toolkit, working through some of the resources, and I think it's a fantastic resource. They're seeing some really tangible changes. So we're starting to see some really good results.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. I think you mentioned about the surveys, actually. I think you mentioned surveys. Can you tell us a bit more about those? Are these surveys to be mandated, or is it voluntary for workplaces, both the leaders and employees, to take the surveys? Is there a future view on this? There's a bit in there. Who'd like to take the survey question?
Well, I can take it at this stage. So at this stage, we're running the Workplace Wellbeing Insight Survey through our funded projects and with our toolkit users. So we're using it as an evaluation tool to look at what's happening within the WorkWell program. We are hoping to roll it out as a tool that's accessible to all Victorian workplaces. At this stage, there's no mandate to use it. We're using it as a way that organisations can check in on those work-related factors and see where they're at and see how things are changing. But it also helps us direct them back to the resources that are most appropriate for them within the toolkit and the online resources there, so they can know which work-related factors might need some work and what are the resources that are aligned with those. So at this stage, there's no mandate to my knowledge, but it is one of those things we do hope to open it up as a resource that people can use to check in on the psychological safety and the mental health of their workplace.
You mentioned about hoping to open it up, and the question involved about the future view as well. Can you explain kind of the future view, if there is one?
So I guess from our perspective is we hope to have this tool out in the market so all Victorian workplaces can access that, and we would hope that they would use that on an annual basis as a way of checking in to see how they're tracking along the way and how they can best allocate their resources. So it is still under development, and we're still testing a few things to try and get the survey to exactly where it needs to be. But we do hope to have that as a resource that we can get out to Victorian workplaces, hopefully next year.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a moment and say to the audience, thanks very much. The questions are coming through continually, and the likes that go with them as well. So please, it shows the interest you have. So thank you very much for that one. Next question is, how do we change organizations that on the surface seem to be doing the right thing, having EAP, mental health first aiders, policies that would seem by wording to be supportive of mental health, yet their day-to-day decisions impacting workers demonstrates a lack of care, creating difficulty and anxiety? Jen, I'm probably going to lead in with you on that.
Yeah, look, I think that comes back to the two prongs of what we're learning from our evaluation, that yes, you do need those systems, those processes and practices, but you do need leadership, and you do need the right leadership to be setting the right culture. And so that's what our evidence is telling us. So if you've got your policies, practices, systems, so people know, that there's consistency in how OHS is applied, and that includes psychosocial health as well. But you need leaders who are not only saying the right thing, but doing the right thing, and that workers assess those leaders as doing the right thing and caring. So it is that leadership thing. How do you make people do that? Again, it's probably going to be, what are the motivators? So return on investment. And I think that's what also, this emerging evidence is telling us, that if workplaces invest in this preventative way, including training leaders, supporting leaders to be good mental health leaders, that you actually do get a return on investment. So again, it's what's going to push the right buttons. And
the next session is actually leaders who work well. It's an important point. Yes. I think I just want to tease that out a little bit more. The importance, or how important is it currently, or how understood is it at the moment about the importance leaders play, the role leaders play in the mental health or psychologically safe workplaces?
Yeah, look, I'll start, but I think Andrea's got some really good insights.
Happy to go straight to Andrea.
Why don't go, Andrea? Yeah.
Well, it's crucial. I think, as Jen was pointing out just a moment ago, you might have policies and practices in place, but if the leadership isn't enacting all of those, then people know that. People see that clearly, that they're not walking the talk. You can have policies and practices to prevent bullying, which is great, and we have to have those, we need those, but you can't legislate good behaviour. You can't legislate the proactive, positive behaviours, but that we know those things lead to, it's not just a nice thing for employers, it's good for your business. And I think it's all about getting that message out there too. There's a lot of evidence that if you're not enacting those policies and practices, it's going to impact severely on your workplace culture. So yeah, that's absolutely fundamental. So was that what you were going to say, Jen, the issue of the leadership?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew.
Thank you. Next question up is, where I work, 70% of employees are in precarious employment. That is in casual and fixed term positions. This job insecurity has an impact on mental health. What are some of the interventions to do to address this job insecurity? Who's best placed for that?
I'll give it a go if you want. It is, and I think it's a really emerging issue across the country, if not the world, of the changing nature of work. I still think that if workplaces still try and address the work-related factors to at least make that workplace mentally healthy while people are there, it's really important. Insecurity of work is something that is probably outside, OHS area at the moment, although we do acknowledge that it is a stressor. I do think that, in terms of workplaces, making decisions around getting the best people, investing in them, good reward and recognition, and possibly longer term employment arrangements is better off for people. But again, that's something that's probably outside the OHS area.
Thanks for that. Next question is, given the recognition of the importance and impact of psychological harm in workplace, will compensation scheme change to align with this recognition? That's a bit of a bigger, higher level question.
Yeah.
Can you say that again, Rob? I didn't.
Given the recognition of the importance and impact of psychological harm in the workplace, will the compensation scheme change to align with this recognition?
But I guess the compensation system already provides support for people who have mental injuries caused by work. So that is part of the system at the moment. And in fact, it's a major driver of why we have WorkWell. I think 14% of our claims at the moment are mental injury claims. So the system certainly does cover.
I understand, like you mentioned 14%. That's a growing number.
Yes.
So it's reflective of, as it is in the question, is the impact of the harm that comes from mental injuries through work. It's a growing number.
That's right. And I think that's part of, there's many factors in that, isn't there? But it's part of the changing design of work. And the previous question around insecurity of work, there's so many different things that work, traditionally was physical. That's what we did. And now it is more, cognitive and knowledge-based. And we also do know the stressors of frontline workers as well, faced with really significant occupational violence and aggression and trauma. So it is a growing problem, and it is acknowledged within the comp system.
Thank you. Next one up is, as this is new view of the application of the Act related to psychological health, will prosecution framework consider more use of enforced undertakings to improve workplace control? I can potentially answer part of that.
Yeah, go, Rob.
So the enforceable undertakings is another tool available to Worksafe where in order to not necessarily have to do a prosecution, there's a whole range of different things we can do from improvement notice all the way through to prosecutions. And each case, whether it's a psychological harm case or a physical case, will be looked on its merits and go through for enforceable undertakings. So there's no restrictions. There are conditions by which you have to meet first to be able to apply for an enforceable undertaking, but I'd expect it to be available for any form of injury or any form of activity from Worksafe to improve and reduce harm in Victorian workplaces. Happy if anybody else has a view.
No.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, what advice do you have in raising these factors in an employee forum environment? Nicholas?
Well, I think about raising the factors. Like I said, if you with the survey, if we understand the factors that are critical or crucial for a certain industry, and having those ability to highlight those factors, I think is a great way to at least bring them to the table, and not take this, we've got these 11 work-related factors to work on, but bringing them down to these are the ones that are critical for our organisation. And as Jen mentioned earlier, it's not biting off too much. I think it makes it more achievable and more tangible if there's a smaller, more narrowed focus. So I think bringing it to a forum where you can address it is about understanding what's specific to your organisation, but then also bringing it down to what you can resource and what you can address.
Thank you. Another one now we have, and this is a bit of a long one. What evidence-based training programs are available that support the capability of managers and workers, including HSRs, in identifying, preventing, protecting, and addressing mental injury and illness resulting from work-related stress, as well as promoting positive mental well-being? There's a lot in that. I'm happy to read it again if we need to.
Oh, look, I think a lot of, we've got 31 projects out there, and a lot of those projects are developing training sorts of products and in different industry sectors. So there's a lot that's about to land in WorkWell in terms of what we've invested in over the last 3 or 4 years. So in terms of them being accredited, we haven't gone down that path, but I think that if anything that you find that's been co-branded with WorkWell, it means that it's had a really high level of oversight through our academics, through our organisational psychologists, through Rob's team, which is the specialists who support us in making sure that any of the information that comes out is evidence-based and is also pushing the boundaries. And I guess that's why WorkWell has been such an important investment for Victoria, because, workplace mental health, the training in the past has been very much around the promote or the address. So really addressing stigma within organisations, which is incredibly important. But I guess what we're saying is the new normal for workplace mental health is to really increase that focus on prevention. And you'll find the WorkWell resources really are leaning really heavily into prevention.
I'm mindful we have actually run out of the advertised time, but there is a lot of interest. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we then go into the wrap up. So hopefully you can stay with us for that. Andrea, I'm going to actually put this question towards yourself. Has the WorkWell models surveys identified particular management style which support a mentally healthy workplace?
The surveys themselves haven't addressed particular managerial styles. I think that, as Jen is saying, there's a lot of training now that's going out that managers can use to adopt to their own particular style. There are so many different ones, and it depends on the organisation and the organisational setting that you've got. So there's no one kind of size fits all. But I'd say that for sure, for looking at the resources that Worksafe are providing in terms of what you can do, and I know there have been some really good initiatives that have occurred through the programs that Jen's been talking about at the moment, and I'm sure that those examples are going to be put up on the WorkWell website before long, and that might be a really useful resource to go and turn to. But there isn't one size fits all in terms of delivering that mental health wellness type of managerial style. So does that kind of answer that question?
Thank you. I'm going to move on. This will be our last question. And I'm going to throw this towards yourself, Jen, and potentially Nicholas. How is Worksafe engaging with managers and supervisors to improve understanding and reasons for making changes within workplace psychological safety?
Look, at the moment, Worksafe has got a really huge marketing and comms campaign that we fund. We try and reach as many workplaces as possible. WorkWell, its reach has been quite huge. So at current last count, we've got about 12,000 workplaces who are registered to use the WorkWell toolkit. We've had, I think, touch points with around 55,000 people. So that's mainly leaders across Victoria. And our touch points then get to about 2.5 million, close to 2.5 million workers. So it's through our marketing campaign, but it's through the projects who are led by employer associations and are led by unions and are led by not-for-profits. It's through their networks. So the reach is really big, and it's workwell.vic.gov.au. You can get to all of those places.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, so that kind of concludes the session for today. But what I want to try and do is just very quickly you've seen the interest. So from each of you, I'm going to ask the question is, what's your last or parting message? What do you want the audience to hear and remember today? So I'm going to start with you, Andrea.
Okay, I think that the key takeout for me overall today is that your business or your organisation doesn't have to be at the highest level of the cultural maturity model if you want to start to see the benefits of improving psych safety in your workplace. If you get the kind of basics established that we've talked about in terms of the policies and procedures that Jennifer and Nicholas have mentioned, and employees really see that you're making their mental health and wellbeing a priority, then you're going to be starting to embed psychological safety into your workplace culture and starting to see the flow-on effects from that.
Thank you. And Nicholas?
Thanks, Rob. I think for me, while it's still really early days, we're seeing some really positive signs from having this multi-pronged approach to addressing getting the right OHS policies and practices in place and getting the right culture and leadership around mental health in a workplace. So we can start to see some really tangible outcomes from employers. So I think, again, this multi-pronged approach, which is hitting at all different levels, is really what I'd like to take away from this one, or people to take away from this one, is that we are seeing some really great outcomes despite it being early days.
Thank you. And finally, Jen.
Look, for me, it's leadership. I think it's the key thing, and when we talk about leadership, it's at all levels of your organisation. It's the big boss, it's your middle management, it's your team leaders, it's your supervisors. So all leaders having those right cultural settings, and what we mean by that is that they role model good behaviour, that they actually show that they care for their workers, that they actually have an awareness of what those 11 work-related factors are, and if they're in the red, do something about it. So I guess, and it's communication. I think it's leaders that being a bit vulnerable themselves, and communicating. So that leaders actually are setting a culture that has the right settings. And I think what we're finding is leaders who are committed to making work mentally healthy end up having better workplaces. And it means that workers and managers leave work every day more physically healthy and more mentally healthy.
Thank you. So that brings an end to the session. So to our three panelists, thank you very, very much this morning for talking us through that. I think it's important to recognise in the title it was about insights, and I think one of the things you've given us is the insight. So thank you all very much for that one. Well, I think to the audience, I hope you found this informative and interesting. I think by the questions that have continued to come through, you have. I think we've well and truly got an insight into what WorkWell is doing, and both its breadth and reach in preventing mental injury in the workplace. It also gives us an example or examples of why it's important for Victorian workplaces to be mentally healthy. So thank you for that. If there are any matters that have raised concerns or you need to talk to Worksafe urgently, please contact us through our advisory line or our emergency line. Now, any of the information that you heard us talk about today or the contact details will be available on screen shortly. So that brings an end to the session today. I'd like to say on behalf of Jen, Nicholas, Andrea, Worksafe, and myself, thanks for tuning in today.
Thank you.